The snow swallowed the sound of her boots. Each step was heavy, dragging against the white that clung to her skirts like a curse. Elara Wynne had not meant to climb this far into the mountains, not at night, not alone, but grief had no sense of direction, and sorrow made no plans. The wind tore through her shawl, cutting her skin like glass, yet she pressed forward as though somewhere ahead in the endless white she might find the warmth she'd lost when her husband's grave closed over him. Her breath came ragged, clouds rising like ghosts. Behind her, the valley lights of the town flickered faint and far away. She did not look back, because there was nothing there for her. Only whispers of pity in the market. Only Bryn Holt's sneer as he reminded her of debts her dead husband left behind. Every word of his stung worse than the frost, now crawling into her bones. And so she walked, her grief guiding her higher, deeper away. But the mountain had no mercy. Snow fell harder, twisting in her eyes, her lashes burning with ice. Somewhere a wolf howled, a long, low sound that vibrated through the trees and into her chest. Elara froze. She knew these woods well enough to understand. Where there was one wolf, there were many. Her pulse hammered, but her feet stumbled slower. The dark outlines of pines loomed, bending heavy with snow. The world had shrunk into shadows and cold, and in that vast emptiness, she thought for the first time. Perhaps the mountain wanted her bones too. She clutched her shawl tighter, but it did nothing. The cold was already inside her, crawling, gnawing, whispering for her to lie down. She thought of her late husband's voice, soft in her memory, urging her to fight. But she also thought of Mara Vale, her sister-in-law, the woman who had once sworn family meant everything, and then vanished when tragedy struck. Betrayal left its own frost. The cold in her chest wasn't only from the storm. Another howl closer this time. The silence after was worse. The air itself seemed to wait, listening. Elara's knees gave a warning tremble, and she sank briefly into the snow. It was softer than she expected, restful. She almost wanted to stay. But just then, crunch. A footstep, not hers. Heavy, deliberate. Elara's head snapped up. Between the trees, a figure loomed. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark cloak of fur. For an instant, terror surged. Had the wolves walked on two legs? The figure moved closer, the snow crunching louder, nearer. Elara's throat tightened, but her voice scraped out a broken cry. Stay back. A laugh cut the storm. Deep, rough, not cruel, but unsettling in its rawness. The sound seemed to roll down the mountain like thunder. You'll freeze beside me, stranger, the man said, his voice carrying strangely warm against the storm. And then he did something that stole the last of Elara's fear. He slipped off the heavy fur cloak draped across his shoulders, stepped forward, and wrapped it around her shivering body. For a moment, her breath stopped, not from the cold this time, but from the shock of warmth, of unexpected mercy. And before she could speak, the wolves howled again, closer still. The mountain, it seemed, wasn't finished with her yet. The wind howled through the trees, as if the mountain itself wanted to drown his voice. Yet Kael Draven stood firm, his cloak now draped over the widow. The fire in his eyes was not one of cruelty, but of a man who had lived too long in places where others did not dare to linger. Elara staggered under the weight of his fur, heavier than stone, yet warmer than memory. Her lips trembled, not from cold this time, but from the question forming in her throat. Why help me? Kael didn't answer at once. He turned his head toward the sound of wolves, his jaw set like stone. Then he looked back at her, eyes narrowed. Because the mountain doesn't need another grave tonight. His tone was gruff, but beneath it there was something else, something softer she could not yet name. Elara studied him. The townsfolk had whispered of him for years. The recluse who haunted the higher slopes. The outlaw who laughed at death. The man no one trusted. They spoke his name in fear, as though summoning a storm. And now here he was, standing before her, his voice rumbling like the mountain itself, his presence both terrifying and oddly safe. "Can you walk?" he asked. Her legs screamed no, but pride forced her head to nod. Kael grunted, unimpressed, and without another word he scooped her into his arms, as though she were nothing more than a fallen branch. Elara gasped, startled by the sudden closeness, the wild scent of pine and smoke clinging to him. She wanted to protest, but another wolf's cry split the night. This one sharper, hungrier. Kael didn't wait. He pushed forward, boots breaking the snow, carrying her deeper into the forest where the dark pressed heavier. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered. His answer came with a faint curve of a smile, a flash of teeth in the dim light. "Somewhere the wolves don't enter unless they're ready to die." Her heart hammered, not only from his words, but from the calm certainty with which he spoke them. The storm battered them, the trees groaned, and yet Kael walked as if the mountain bent to him. Each step left Elara caught between fear of who he was and fear of what would happen if he let her go. The night thickened around them. Shadows twisted into shapes that looked like hunters watching, waiting. Elara clutched the fur tighter, realizing how close she had been to surrendering her life to the snow. Now, in the arms of the man she had been warned about, she wondered if she had escaped one death only to stumble into another. Kael's grip tightened as he climbed a ridge. At the peak, he paused, scanning the valley below. Far down, faint lights blinked from the town she had left behind. They looked like stars, fragile and distant. For a moment, Elara thought she saw something flicker across Kael's face. Bitterness, longing, or maybe regret. It was gone before she could name it. Then came the growl. Low, guttural, too close. Kael stopped. His breath clouded the air, steady as stone. Slowly, he set Elara on her feet, his eyes fixed on the shadows shifting between the pines. "Stay behind me," he said. The wolves had followed. She could see their eyes now, yellow, gleaming, circling. Hunger wrapped in fur. Her heart leapt to her throat. Kael's hand drifted beneath his cloak, fingers curling around the hilt of an axe strapped across his back. Elara wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in her chest. The storm raged, the pack tightened its circle, and Kael Draven only laughed. A deep, dangerous laugh that seemed to challenge the night itself. And the wolves did not run. The cabin appeared like a ghost from the storm. Dark logs pressed against the white snow, smoke curling faintly from its crooked chimney. By the time Kael pushed the heavy wooden door open, Elara's body was trembling so violently she could no longer feel her own fingers. He guided her inside, shut the door with a thud, and the sound of the storm dimmed into a muffled growl beyond the walls. The cabin smelled of pine resin, leather, and smoke. A single fire roared in the stone hearth, spilling flickering gold across the room. Kael dropped his axe beside the door and glanced at her. "Sit," he said simply, pointing to a fur-draped chair. She obeyed, sinking into it like a woman who feared her legs might collapse beneath her. Kael stoked the flames, then tossed another log onto the fire. Sparks leapt into the air like startled birds. For the first time, Elara saw his face clearly, lined with weather, scarred in places, eyes sharp and unblinking. This was not a man softened by years of peace. This was someone shaped by loss and solitude, hardened like the mountain stone itself. "Why do they call you dangerous?" she asked before she could stop herself. Kael froze, the poker still in his hand. His mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Because I am." His tone was flat, final, as though the truth needed no embroidery. The fire crackled between them. Elara wanted to shrink into silence, but the warmth of the flames stirred something in her chest. Courage, or maybe the recklessness of a woman who had already walked close to death. "And yet you carried me," she said softly. For a heartbeat, his expression shifted. There was a shadow there, a memory lurking. He leaned the poker against the hearth and sat across from her, his massive frame filling the small room. "A long time ago," he began, his voice lower now, "I carried someone else, but I was too late then." Elara tilted her head, waiting. He did not give her a name, but the silence told her enough. The man who laughed at wolves was still hunted, by a ghost, not a beast. Her own secrets clawed inside her, begging to be spoken. The warmth, the crackle of fire, The strange safety of his presence. It loosened her restraint. "My husband is dead," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Not by nature's hand, by man's." Kael's gaze sharpened. "It was Bryn Holt," she continued, the name burning her tongue. "He set a trap for him, business, debts, lies, drove him to ruin, then left me with nothing but pitying stares. And when I asked for fairness, Bryn only laughed, said a widow has no voice." Her voice shook, but not from weakness. It was rage buried too long. She looked up at Kael, meeting his eyes across the fire. "That's why I walked into the storm tonight. I thought perhaps the mountain would be kinder than men." The silence thickened, broken only by the hiss of burning wood. Kael did not pity her. His stare was too fierce for that. Instead, she saw something else flicker there. Recognition. Understanding. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time his voice softened. "The mountain kills without malice. Men kill with intent. That's worse." The words sank into her, deeper than the cold had ever reached. For the first time in months, she felt her chest loosen, just a fraction. But the moment did not last. A low growl echoed outside, closer than before. The wolves had not retreated. They had followed. Elara's eyes darted to the shuttered window, where shadows moved against the snow. Kael rose, slow and deliberate, his hand once again curling around his axe. He glanced back at her, a flash of firelight gleaming off his scar. "You said the mountain might be kinder," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. "Stay behind me, and I'll prove it." The wolves scratched at the door. The storm howled with them. The night was not done testing them yet. The cabin walls groaned under the weight of the blizzard. Wind rattled the shutters like the fists of 100 angry men, and snow piled high against the door, sealing them in. Elara sat rigid by the fire, listening to the storm's rage, her hands wrapped tightly in Kael's heavy fur cloak. It smelled of smoke and pine, and faintly, dangerously of him. Kael paced the room, his axe leaning against the table, his movements restless, like a caged wolf. He paused once to listen, head tilted toward the door. "They're circling," he muttered. Her stomach tightened. "The wolves." His eyes narrowed. "And the storm." "Both." He gave a low laugh, though no humor touched his voice. "One tests the body, the other tests the soul. You'll learn soon enough which is worse." A log popped in the fire, sparks rising like fireflies, breaking the silence. Elara wanted to speak, to ask more, but Kael's gaze caught hers, sharp as steel. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed quieter than the storm in his eyes. "I don't understand you," she said, her voice trembling more from nerves than cold. "The town says you're a killer, that you vanished because of blood spilled in anger." Kael's jaw tightened. He did not deny it. Instead, he crouched by the fire, staring into the flames as if they carried the truth she sought. "The town knows pieces," he said at last. "Pieces, sharp enough to cut, but they don't know the whole blade." The fire painted his scars in gold and shadow. Elara leaned closer, pulled by something she could not name. "Then tell me," she whispered. For a moment, his lips parted, and she thought he would. But then the cabin shook violently, a loud thud against the outer wall, followed by a growl that made her blood turn to ice. Kael shot to his feet, axe in hand. "They're testing the walls," he said grimly. Elara's heart pounded. "Can I get in?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Not unless we fail." He moved to the window, prying open the shutter just an inch. Snow swirled in, stinging his face, but through it he saw the dark shapes, wolf after wolf, their eyes glowing like coals, their bodies ghostly against the storm. They were waiting, watching. Elara's breath caught. The thought of those creatures tearing through the cabin made her chest ache with panic. But when Kael closed the shutter, his expression was not fear, it was fury. "They're patient," he muttered, "smarter than most men. But the storm will break before we do." Her eyes widened. "How can you be so sure?" Kael turned to her then, his gaze steady, his voice firm enough to quiet the wind. "Because I've lived through worse storms than this one, and I don't intend to bury another soul tonight." His words should have comforted her, but they raised new questions instead. What storms had scarred this man? What ghost still howled inside him? Elara opened her mouth to ask, but before she could, a loud crash rattled the cabin. Something heavy slammed against the door. The wood splintered. Snow gusted in through the cracks. Kael growled low in his throat, lifting his axe. "Stay behind me." The storm roared louder. The wolves pressed closer, and Elara realized with dawning fear that survival was no longer just about the cold. It was about blood, teeth, and the truth Kael Draven still carried like a blade at his side. And the night had only begun to cut. The cabin door shuddered again, splinters snapping, snow bursting through the cracks. Elara clutched the fur tighter around her body, heart hammering against her ribs. She had faced grief, hunger, humiliation, but never the raw terror of glowing eyes waiting to rip through the wood. Kael planted himself between her and the door, axe raised. His silhouette against the firelight looked less like a man and more like some ancient warrior carved from the mountain itself. The wolves snarled, claws scraping against the wood, each sound dragging Elara deeper into panic. "Stay low," Kael growled. His voice was iron, unyielding. The door burst open. Snow exploded into the cabin as the first wolf lunged, its jaws snapping, eyes wild with hunger. Kael met it with a swing of his axe, so swift the fire seemed to leap with it. The beast fell, yelping, blood steaming against the snow-dusted floor. Elara screamed, but the sound was drowned by the chorus of howls outside. More shadows surged forward. Kael moved like the storm itself, his axe a blur of steel and fury. Another wolf fell, then another, yet still they pressed on. The fire hissed, sparks scattering as the cabin shook with the violence. But the wolves were not his only fear. As Elara cowered, her eyes met Kael's face between strikes, and she saw not just rage, but pain. A man reliving something, each swing not against wolves, but against memories too cruel to name. Her breath caught. She knew that look. She had worn it herself in the nights when Bryn Holt's betrayal haunted her more than her husband's death. A wolf slipped past Kael, lunging toward her. Elara screamed again, scrambling back, her hand closing around the iron poker near the fire. Without thinking, she swung. The iron connected with a sickening thud. The wolf collapsed, whimpering, its body smoking where the heat branded its fur. Elara's hands shook violently, but she was alive. And Kael's eyes, sharp, blazing, met hers with something like respect. "You fight," he muttered. "I survive," she shot back, though her voice trembled. Another crash at the window. Wolves hurled themselves against the shutters, breaking them open. Snow and teeth poured in. Kael roared, charging toward them, his axe flashing like lightning. Elara grabbed a burning log from the fire, holding it aloft like a torch, swinging it at the snapping jaws that lunged too close. The battle blurred into chaos, blood staining snow, firelight mixing with shadow, the storm screaming through the broken walls. Elara's heart raced, her arms burned, but something fierce surged inside her. She was not the helpless widow Bryn had sneered at. Not anymore. At last, with a final heave, Kael's axe struck deep into the largest wolf, the pack's leader. The beast fell with a gurgling snarl, its yellow eyes dimming. The others hesitated, circling once, then retreating into the blizzard with low, mournful howls. Silence fell, except for the storm's hollow wail. Kael leaned against the wall, blood streaking his arm, his chest heaving. Elara dropped the burning log, her body trembling so violently she thought she might collapse. The floor was littered with snow, blood, and fur, the aftermath of a night that had tried to swallow them both. Kael's gaze found hers, heavy with exhaustion, yet blazing with something new. "You didn't freeze," he said, almost a whisper. Elara swallowed hard, tears blurring her vision. "Neither did you." The fire crackled, blood steamed, and outside, the storm raged on. But inside, something fragile yet unbreakable had been forged in the fight. And Elara knew, with terrifying clarity, that her world had changed forever. Morning crept slowly over the peaks, pale light piercing the storm's broken veil. The blizzard had spent its fury, leaving the mountain draped in silence. Smoke still curled from Kael's chimney, a fragile thread against the endless sky. Inside, the cabin bore the scars of the night: splintered wood, paw prints pressed into melting snow, streaks of blood staining the floor. Elara sat wrapped in Kael's cloak, her body aching, her spirit trembling on the edge of something she could not yet name. Kael stood by the doorway, staring out at the snowbound world. His axe leaned against the wall, still dark with wolf's blood. He looked tired, older somehow, yet steadier than the mountain itself. "You could leave," he said at last, his voice rough, as though the words had been dragged out of him. "When the path clears, go back to your town, to whatever's left for you there." Elara lifted her eyes to him. "And you?" His jaw tightened. "The mountain keeps what it wants." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The fire popped. Her fingers curled tighter around the cloak, his cloak that still carried his warmth. She thought of Bryn Holt's sneer, of the pitying stares, of the endless nights where she had felt invisible. And she thought of the man who had carried her through the storm, who had stood between her and death, who had laughed at the wolves and then bled to keep her alive. "I don't want what's left," she whispered. "I want what's ahead." Kael's gaze snapped to hers, sharp, uncertain. In his eyes, she saw the weight of years spent alone, the ghost that had never let him rest. He turned away, as if afraid to be seen too clearly. Elara rose, the fur cloak slipping from her shoulders. Slowly, she crossed the room, each step deliberate, until she stood before him. She took the cloak, heavy and worn, and pressed it back into his hands. "You said the mountain keeps what it wants," she murmured. "Then let it keep us both." Kael stared at the cloak, at her, at the snow beyond the door. His breath trembled, though his body did not. At last, with a quiet, almost reverent motion, he swung the fur back around her shoulders. Not as a shield this time, but as a gift. "It's yours now," he said, voice low, steady. "Not just for warmth. For whatever comes." Her throat tightened, but she did not cry. Instead, she looked up at him with a new strength, born not from survival alone, but from choice. The widow who had walked into the storm seeking death had found something else entirely. Kael brushed past her, stepping back into the cabin's light. For the first time, his laughter came not like thunder, but like the breaking of ice in spring, rough, unexpected, and alive. Elara pulled the cloak tighter, feeling its weight settle not just on her shoulders, but in her soul. Redemption, she realized, wasn't always a gentle hand or a soft word. Sometimes it was a man with scars, an axe, and a heart that had refused to die, even when the world demanded it. Outside, the wolves had gone, the storm was over, and the path ahead lay hidden beneath snow. But inside, within the battered walls of the cabin on the peaks, two lives, once broken, had begun to knit into something unshakable. And as the fire warmed them both, Elara understood the truth. She would never walk into the storm alone again.